with Democratic Senator Evan Bayh of Indiana. Senator, I don't mean to hit you broadside with this latest news development, but reports and that Goldman Sachs is settling with the government. Do you know anything about it and what we might be seeing?
Neil, I don't know anything about it, but I would assume that Goldman, from a business standpoint, concluded that it was important to get it behind them. And we'll have to wait and see what the terms of the settlement are to know what the government was insisting upon in return. What
do you think of Goldman and whether they should or settle with anyone now or before?
Well, Neil, I think that's up to them. I can't offer an opinion about that until I know what the terms of the settlement were.
But I guess I'm looking at, Senator, in the context of a lot of the big banks and financial leaders. Obviously, what passed in the Senate today, a big financial reform that'll be going to the president's desk. Many argue, including those at Goldman, that what was odd about that reform is that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were left out of it, and yet it's Goldman the one that's going to be sort of slapped around today and pay something or do something, the details of which we don't know.
Well, again, I assume, first, Neil, I was one of only 2 Democrats to actually vote to include Fannie and Freddie. I think that was a big omission in this bill and is an issue that has to be addressed going forward because that whole subprime issue had some relationship to them and it needs to be addressed. So that's number one. Number two, there's still a lot of uncertainty out there with regard to what the regulators will ultimately decide about how to implement this bill. I assume what the folks at Goldman Sachs were thinking, and again, I haven't talked to them, so I'm just speculating here, is they were saying, look, we've got a lot of uncertainty. This is a threat to our reputation, the integrity of our franchise. Let's try and limit the amount of uncertainty by at least getting this SEC enforcement action off the table. I assume the terms were acceptable to them, or they wouldn't have done it.
All right, and I do want to continue with you, Senator. I just want to update people just turning in again. Besides the BP cap thing, and besides trying to put Goldman putting a cap on the problems it's been having with the government, just keeping you posted that later this hour we should be getting the details on the latter from Goldman Sachs, and it has indeed settled with the government. Whether that means Lloyd Blankfein, the top cheese at Goldman, is a goner, it's anyone's guess. That is probably a good guess, but we will have to see. Now, back to Senator Evan Bayh. And Senator, on this growing talk from the Debt Commission that it's entertaining anything and everything, including more taxes. Now, you were among those who said you were against raising taxes on anyone. You drew the line even for the rich because you said, look, maybe when things improve, but they're not at that point yet. Is that still where you stand?
Yes, that's absolutely my stand, Neil. I think we need to focus upon the deficit needs to come down. We need to focus upon spending restraint. In fairness to Erskine Bowles, he recommended 75% spending cuts, 25% revenue, so at least he's focused on spending cuts. But right now...
By the way, you know this inside and outside. I don't remind me. When he's saying 75% spending, that he would cut spending and the other would come by raising taxes, but continue.
That's what he said. It remains to be seen what they'll actually propose. But my broader point, Neil, is the economy is very fragile right now. Raising taxes on anyone at this time runs the risk of undercutting a demand which we need to buttress to keep this economy going, and it is way too premature to talk about raising taxes right now, whether it's on individuals or businesses, because we need to increase business confidence so that they'll invest some of that $2 trillion they currently have sitting on the sidelines, and we want consumers to be a little more confident as well and step back into the marketplace. So now is not the time to be raising taxes.
I want to switch gears. I know I've been all over the map with you, Senator. You've been very kind. But this BP potential cap that's working, if it does succeed, it has to succeed for a while, permanently. But then there is the issue of drilling in that area, and if it can continue. How do you feel about the moratorium and whether this might speed the process along toward lifting it?
Well, a couple of things. First, if they have been successful in capping that well, that may be one of the few things that Democrats and Republicans can agree on in Washington, Neil, if that's a good thing. So number one, let's hope that's the case. Number two, clearly we get, until we find a way to become more energy independent, we get the Gulf is one of our major sources of domestic oil. If we just, cut that off, we're only going to be more dependent on Saudi Arabia, Venezuela. That's not a healthy situation. So I'd say 2 things. Number one, let's focus like a laser on what went wrong with the BP rig. Let's insist that all of the companies have better contingency plans in place and take the steps necessary to just totally minimize the chances of anything like this reoccurring. Once they've done that, however, Neil, we need to continue exploration there because it's a lot better to have a domestic source than it is to continue to rely upon foreign oil.
All right. Senator Bayh, thank you very, very much.